Wonderful. All right, so I want to introduce, I'm going to start by introducing Lynn Dang, my favorite title rep, and say hello, Lynn. Everybody probably knows who you are because she gets to speak a few times. And since Lynn's not talking, I'm going to introduce Melissa McRoberts, who's my favorite escrow officer, and she's going to unlock the mysteries of the preliminary title report and answer all possible questions you might have about said document. So take it away, Melissa.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you. Our video meets you. We do have a little slideshow presentation. We did send out copies of it. There's a couple pages that the wording is a little bit jumbled just because it's supposed to be layered on top of one another. But as we go through it, we can make notes. You can stop me if you've got any questions or concerns as we go through, because it's a lot of material and there's just a lot of different things that we can encounter on a different title report. So first things first, what is a preliminary title report? A preliminary title report is an offer to insure a property. It's not guaranteed that we're going to offer title insurance for a property. This is going to give us a snapshot of if we can provide it title insurance and give you an idea of what's on the property. There might be potential problems that would keep us from being able to issue title insurance, and the title report would show that. It contains relevant information in regards to the parties and different things that we would become aware of, again, that we may not be able to insure, such as if the names are wrong on the property or if the titles run differently. Sorry, I'm looking at two different screens and it's confusing me, so give me a second while I adjust to do this. Just did that one. Insurance response. Most important part as an agent. I mean, when I get my title reports, I do look at them and I do review them, and I'll try to say, hey, by the way, I noticed this. Can I turn up my volume? I noticed this. Let's look at this. There's solar on the property. Does the seller aware that there's solar on the property, or we have two different liens? But you really need to look at your preliminary title report and you need to ask the question. If it doesn't look right to you, say, Melissa, what is this item? Is this something that we should be concerned with? Or how do I clear this? So there are two types of title policies that we can issue in a transaction. On a resale transaction, we have the owner's title insurance policy. The owner's title insurance policy is depending on which county you're in. In Santa Clara County, it's a seller-paid county. So the seller will pay for the owner's title insurance. The owner's policy is for the owner of the property. So it's going to be the new buyer that's on title. We're insuring that new buyer. We're going to ensure that they are in fact the owners, and it's good for them for as long as they own the property. A lender's title policy, so when you're representing your buyers, and the buyer's getting a loan, the lender wants to make sure that they have title insurance, that they're protected. And it has nothing to do with the buyer. It has everything to do with the lender. We're protecting the lender at that point from any defects on title. So things that are shown in the title report, the estate or interest covered, that actually is saying a lot of times what type of property it is. So you'll see on a prelim, it'll say a fee. A fee means it's a single family dwelling. We only have two types of residential properties. We have a single family dwelling and we have a condo. So you also have that PUD that's in the middle, which is a planned unit development or duplex or a duet home of some sort. They can also be homes like in Silver Creek up here. We've got, it is a community and they're considered PUDs, but they don't share walls. So those are also considered single family dwellings. So for your purpose, you have a single family house and you have a condominium. Those are the two different kinds of dwellings for residential.
I just want to also add, so for those of you that don't know the difference between condo versus planned unit development. So the condominium, you own the airspace, right? And then the planned unit development, PUD, townhouses, you own the airspace, the improvement, and also the land, just so you know.
And if I can just say something from a real estate agent's point of view in marketing, the word townhouse generally denotes somebody that has two or more levels, right? So if you have a listing and it's two or more levels, that design is also called a townhouse. But townhouse does not have a legal definition, isn't that? And you guys can correct me, but there's no legal definition for the word townhouse. There's condos,
No, there's not.
planned unit developments, planned development projects, and well, others, but yeah. All right.
That's why we can still consider them single family homes.
Right.
So the owner or estate of interest, your owner is always going to be your seller. It should always be on title. Estate or interest, so if this property, if your seller passed away and the court has designated, it would be an estate, it would be a living trust, it would be, so it's just another word or entity of who is holding title, who the ownership of the property is. I did want to make note, an example that I always get caught on, or I have a lot of realtors that don't understand, is if I, on my house, I'm Melissa McRoberts, I own my house, and I decided I wanted to add my son to title. So I had a deed drafted up, I went down to the county and I recorded it. This is what's called an uninsured deed. So it would say, on the prelim, it would say Melissa McRoberts at subject to item number. So whenever you see your vested owner and the title says subject to, that's a red flag. So anytime, me as an individual creates a deed, goes down to the county without insurance, without title insurance, then it's called an uninsured deed. And it raises a red flag to us because we need to validate that deed. What's to stop somebody from forging my name and going down to the county to record something? That's, obviously from an underwriting standpoint, that's what they're looking at. The parcel involved is the property address or the APN number. The thing about property addresses is they are subject to change. You can actually go down to the city and request to change your address if you don't like your physical address. Your zip code is not insurable because it's subject to the postal service that's closest to you. You may live in San Jose, but if you're on the border of Campbell, you may get a Campbell zip code because it's closer to the Campbell postal service. So the exceptions, liens, encumbrances, those are the things on the preliminary title. It's the meat and potatoes of it that we'll get into in just a moment. Other requirements, that's after the exceptions. Those are different things that may come up that, again, we need to look at. And then your plat map. Every title report concludes with a copy of the plat map. It shows exactly where the parcel is on the street. Does give some of the dimensions. They can show certain easements, again, depending on the type of property. So getting into what an actual title report looks like. So when you get a preliminary title report, it's going to look like this. This is going to be our blanket page 1. And it basically, again, just confirms this is not an actual title policy. We're not guaranteeing we can issue title insurance on this. But this is what our preliminary title looks like. Page 1 goes over the items that we just talked about. It goes over, you'll see where it's saying, who requested, Kathy Berry requested that title report. So you as the listing agent, if you requested it, it's going to have your information. It's going to show the property address, the date. It's not going to be the most current date. This is the date of our title plan. So this is the latest information that's available as of the plant date from our title department. I think it breaks it down. There we go. So we went over the escrow number. So again, it'll tell you what your escrow number is and who the escrow officer is. Property address that we're running.
And by the way, if you're a listing agent, it's a good idea to put that information, the escrow number and who the escrow is with, and in the private remarks, so that buyer's agents know what escrow you're expecting them to use.
That is an excellent. We just had that happen.
Yeah, just thought I'd throw that out.
So this is where we're talking about different kinds of policies. So when we're talking about title insurance, we have 2 different kinds of policies. I'll save that for a later date because most of the time for most residential transactions, we're always going to use an ALTA, which is just the type of policy that most lenders require. Here's where it says a fee. So that's where you want to look at and again, as long as it says a fee, you're safe to assume that it's a single family dwelling and or townhouse. And if it's a condo, it will actually say condominium right there. Again, these are your owners. For this particular example, these owners are in a family trust. I would have you note that if you do come across your sellers and they are in a trust, you want to make sure that they have their trust documents. I have a sale that's actually closing today. Husband and wife, I think they're estranged. I never got the full answer, but they were in a trust. They don't know where any of their trust documents are. Husband was out of the country. He ended up passing away out of the country. So, we had to kind of figure out a way to get around it because they didn't know who their trust attorney was. They didn't have their documents. We couldn't provide, we were able to get through it. But also, since they hadn't been using their trust, when you hold title, this is the owner. The owner is the trust of the property, not the individual person. So our newest issue with my transaction is that I have to issue a check to her as trustee of the trust. Well, if she doesn't have a bank account set up as trustee of her trust, she's not going to be able to cash that check. So you just those are things that you want to note. If your seller is in a trust, make sure they have their documentation, copy of their trust, or at least know who their trust attorney was, and then ask if they have an account set up under the name of the trust. Your legal description of the property. And again, as I was saying, your addresses can change. The county knows this particular property by the parcel number, by the legal description, how it was recorded, what book, what track. That's how the county identifies this property.
And we are insured the legal description, not the property address.
Yeah.
Because just in case that changes, the legal description is what we insure.
Can you guys see the questions that people are?
No.
Oh, okay. So why don't I just catch us up? It's not.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. How often does it happen that owners don't buy title insurance?
Very rarely.
Very rarely, yeah. Who pays for the lender title insurance? It's the borrower that pays.
Yes.
Whoever
is the person, the buyer, the borrower, they always are responsible for their own lender's title insurance policy.
Right. It's a loan cost, not a selling cost. As
But also note this, if you are getting a loan from a lender, you cannot close escrow without a title policy because the lender will not allow you to close escrow without a lender's policy.
And it's in the residential purchase agreement that you're going to get one. Then, if you have a change of address, will the new address then show up on future preliminary reports and the old address stop being referenced? And would it be referenced in the deed or the title? A lot of change of address questions.
Yeah, if you were to change, there's examples where the county has changed or updated people's parcel numbers. So that gets updated in the public records. If you go down to the city and you were to apply to change your address, we're talking about the physical street address, that would get updated with the county records as well. If you just decide to move and change your address, that's not going to be updated on the county records.
All right. And Nini is raising her hand, I think, very politely. Do you want to speak your question, or did you just type it in also? She also, I think, can you please show us an example of a co-op, pre-co-op, and how it's different from the condo townhouse? That's a much longer description, right? We're going to go through this prelim, They want to see what a prelim for a townhouse would look like and a prelim for a condo.
So the prelim for the townhouse is going to look exactly like this. Because again, it's the same thing. They're considered one and the same. The only difference with a condo is if we look back here, as I mentioned, where it says a fee,
Yeah.
this little box right here is going to say condominium.
And so question, if mom adds daughter's name on title, is there a transfer fee?
So that's a whole another thing that we can do. But if mom wants to add her person to title, son, daughter, niece, nephew, there is transfer tax. Anytime you add or remove someone from title, there is always going to be transfer tax. The only difference is when it's parent to child or grandparent to child, the property is excluded from being reassessed for property taxes.
But
the transfer tax is always applicable.
Yeah, it's like a sales tax. Let's see. I've opened escrow for a seller. The seller pays for title insurance. Let me just say it depends on the county. My husband put our property in a trust account without my name on it. What should I do?
So can we do this, guys? Let Melissa finish.
Right, we'll do the questions.
What we're going through is the basic understanding of how to look at, how to review a preliminary title report, and then we can leave, if we have time at the end, and we can leave, open for questions and answers. Is that okay with you guys? All right, great, thank you.
Yeah.
All
right. Sorry about that. It's good.
No,
No,
it's all good.
I mean, we can even just do a question and answer
No,
lunch.
I want you to, yes, this may not be the last time we
No,
see
it's
that.
not.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
We can have another session on red flags on preliminary title report. Then we can talk more about that.
All right, let's go.
All right. So you looked at your page 1 of the prelim, you verified the property address, you verified that these are the current owners. Then we're gonna flip to the next page. This is a snapshot of what is recorded against the property. This is what is on the property. It's always going to start with the property taxes. Property taxes are first and foremost always most important. Item number 1 is stating that, this is an older example obviously, that the 2019-2020 property taxes are not yet due. So that means the bill has not come out yet. Item number 2, I should probably read this. So those are future taxes. Item number 2 shows the current tax amount. So you do want to look at this because this is going to affect your seller's bottom line. Are the taxes due? Any taxes that are due need to be paid in escrow. So these ones are saying that they're due after December 10th. This one's due after April 10th. So whatever tax bill is due during the time that we're selling our property will need to be paid. The others may need to be prorated accordingly between the buyer and the seller, because we do prorate taxes based on the time that everybody's occupied the property. So this is another red flag. It shows that this seller was naughty and didn't pay their property taxes. So they're in default. So again, we're going to have to pay this. So if your sales price is $500,000, you're doing 5% commission. They owe $200,000. You need to calculate this in as a debit because that's going to come out of their proceeds. We always have a notation about supplemental taxes. Supplemental taxes are when you first buy your property, and then the county reassesses your property. And if there's a difference between what you bought it for versus what the seller paid for it, they're going to issue a supplemental tax bill, and that tax bill will be due on top of the regular property taxes.
So our Melissa or our mobile notary, when they sign the loan docs, chances are Melissa will explain what supplementary taxes are. And just so you be aware of, just make sure that your seller know, right, that, not your buyer, the buyer. At the end, after closing escrow, there's a very high chance that you get a tax bill, right, regarding this?
Yes.
Because I do get phone calls from realtors, and sometimes they come back and say, well, how come that my buyer has a tax bill? So they were not educated or aware of. So it's good to let them know prior to, so they know not to be surprised when they get a tax bill.
So occasionally, there are additional assessments. So we all know property taxes are the taxes of the value of your home. There are additional assessments that are included in your property taxes when you guys vote for different school assessments, different library assessments. Those items get included into your property tax bill. Things like Melrose, which are for different school districts, those are also included. So you may, depending again on the parcel and the property, there may be notations about Melrose taxes, and that's just stating that this particular area contributes to that, and that item is included in their tax bill. It is not an additional bill. It's not something that's due above and beyond. It's just part of their tax bill. CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Every development, when it's developed, there are CC&Rs. The builder usually puts them together, and it dictates what the use of the property, what the development is for. Some of them are extremely outdated. They include things that could be considered racial or inappropriate, and those things obviously do not apply anymore. But again, it just states, some will say if you can have livestock on your property, if you are near a creek, whether you guys can have docks, at the creek on your property, things like that.
Yeah, there's a development in San Jose, the Silver Creek Country Club. Part of their CC&Rs, you cannot park your cars on the street during the day. So that's a part of the CC&Rs, the restrictions.
All right, then we go into easements. Now you have to remember the water company has their pipes running through your house. PG&E has their products running through your property. When you buy your property, you own it from the center of the earth to the top of the atmosphere. So they have to have easements to allow those particular utility companies to have access to your property, because obviously their product runs through your property. And that's what these said easements are for when it comes to public utilities. There are some other easements that, you know, if you live in a really small cul-de-sac and you have like a little strip of plants in the middle of that strip, there might be an easement, a public access easement to all of the people around that allow access to it because it's a part of everybody's property. Deed of trust. So these are the mortgages. And I want you to note that where it says deed of trust, it's mortgages. So that's what the seller owes on the property. And this is where we really need to look at, and you need to look at how many are on there. This particular example only has one mortgage, but if you see something like this listed 2 or 3 times, that's a red flag, because now it's like, oh, does our seller have 2 or 3 mortgages? Or is this an old mortgage that maybe didn't get removed off the property that I need to work with Melissa to get this off, or we need to figure it out. So just make a little note about that. But it does list, so on this particular example, the mortgage is $225,000. It was recorded on March of 2012. It's going to show who the grantor was, so that should match our sellers. And if it doesn't say, you know, instead of John, if it said Melissa McRoberts, oh, wait a minute, that's not my party, so that we would need to look at that again. And then it just says what day it was recorded and what the instrument number is. And my very favorite thing in the whole wide world, solar. So this property, as you can see, it says Sunbeam Solar. So you want to again look at this, because especially in a resale transaction, what's most important is the seller has to make contact with the solar company to let them know they're selling their home. I can't do this. You as the realtor can't do this. The seller has to make contact with their solar company and say, I am selling my home and I want to transfer it to the new buyer. So you'll want to make sure that at least they have that information. It could cause issues for the buyer's lender, because the buyer's lender is going to want to see information. If your owner is leasing it, how much are the lease payments? Because they're going to have to, if the buyer's going to assume that, the buyer needs to take that into consideration when they're applying for their loan, because it's an additional expense. So the more information we have, the better off we are to help further along, further the process with the buyer and the lender.
Also note that during the pandemic, we noticed that getting paid off from the solar company takes a long time. So start the process early. If you saw, just like Melissa said, if you saw there's a solar system, have the seller contact the company immediately and start the process. Because it takes, their turnaround time is long, so just FYI. We don't want to delay your closing, so help us help you.
So there's 2 types. So this is a notice that there is solar on the property. This is saying that the solar company has their equipment on the property. So they have a right also to the equipment on their property, whether you're leasing it or if you're in the process of buying it. They also record what's called a finance statement. This finance statement The only reason I'm pointing it out is because, again, if you have somebody who's purchasing this property and they're purchasing it with a loan, the lender is going to require that we get a release for this finance statement. So I need to get as much information, or I need to get the information so that I can start requesting that. Because again, resale transactions, they give better priority to than they would a refinance, but it still is a lengthy process. There's not a lot of work involved in that process, but it is a lengthy process. So the last couple items on the prelim are not that big of a deal. So remember, our sellers, our owners were in their living trust. And I mentioned that you want to make sure that your sellers have documentation. We are always going to require a trust certification. This is something that I can provide to them when they sign their paperwork, but they're going to sign under penalty and perjury that they are the trustees of their trust, and they do have the power to sign on behalf of the trust. So if there's anything that goes awry and they don't have the power, our title policy will not cover it if they've completed our trust certification. The last section of the title policy are our notes. This is what title's gonna provide, and it tells me different things that I may or may not need to do in order to move forward on an escrow side to clear things. These, it's important to note, on a title insurance policy, these actually don't show up on the final title policy. They're just items that we need to look for. The last page is always gonna be the plat map, as I stated before. It's gonna show the map and map, book, and page number, so that also makes up the parcel number, the disclaimer, the subdivision that it may or may not be in, again, depending on the age of the property. So, this is sorry, these are different issues that can arise on your title policy. So they have false impersonation of a true owner. That again, and it has happened where, people have, this world is full of a lot of different people and they try different things. As I had stated before, if I decided to add my son to title and I went down and recorded a grant deed, who's to say that my son didn't forge my name? And had a notary friend of his notarize it and record it. If we just relied on that in the chain of title without asking the right questions, then again, our title policy, we would be at fault if we sold the property from the wrong person. Undisclosed or missing heirs. Whenever somebody dies, I shouldn't say that, when somebody passes away, if the proper steps aren't handled and done properly, which again is a whole nother, we can go over that separate thing, then other heirs can come out of the woodworks and claim a claim to the property, and we would have to take a look at that and then reverse the transaction. Mistakes in recording our legal documents, misinterpretation of wills. Again, we are not estate attorneys, we are not attorneys. I'm an escrow officer, I have an underwriter that issues title insurance, so we can't provide advice on that kind of stuff. You always want to make sure that your seller goes and seeks counsel of whatever type that they need.
So I want to add, so this is going back to the question that someone had asked earlier, is why we have to have title insurance. So just so you understand, title insurance is to protect you from future events.
And these are the kind of future events that can happen.
That you can proceed, unlike medical insurance, unlike car insurance, where it protects you from what's gonna happen in the future. This is to protect you what happened in the past that you didn't know, right? So for instance, if someone, fraudulently add their name on titles, or they sold a property without the actual owner knowing about that, so we can come back to the title company where they're issued a policy that will protect you, right? So that's why you have to have title insurance, that reason.
And I have a lot of, during the refi craze we just passed, or just came through, a lot of different people were adding their spouses to title and removing their spouse, or adding their brother-in-law and removing their brother-in-law. And you have to understand, when we do a title report, we start from the beginning of the development, and they look at each and every deed. So maybe it took, you bought a property and there were 4 of you. 2 couples came together. One couple got divorced and the wife came off, and then, the other couple got divorced, and it was the 2 men that owned the property, but the wife didn't sign off, and then the 2 men sold the property. Well, if the wife over here didn't sign off, she's technically still an owner. And you can sell the property 3 or 4 more times, but eventually, if the wife finally catches up, she's got a title claim. So, it's important for us to make sure that when title's going through it, they're examining each and every transaction that this property has gone through, and really looked at all the different deeds that have reported, because there is a lot of different things. We've had, back 30, 40 years ago, it wouldn't be uncommon for your neighbor to give you a loan to buy the house. And it was just a simple deed that was recorded, and then they paid them off, no big deal, and then everybody passes away. But that deed was never removed from the county records. So those are different things that, we really look at, and, you want to make sure that your owners are protected, and even the sellers to some degree. We've had poor sellers that have had to do a lot of work to clean up their properties, and they didn't even know that this had happened because mom and dad passed away, and mom and dad lived there for 50 years, and, especially, it happens all the time. Deeds by minors. A lot of people want to add their children to title, especially if they're minors. You actually need court authorization if the child is a minor to sell the property. So that's, if you come across that, and you're potential at a listing presentation, and they say, oh yeah, I have my son, well, you need to ask how old they are, because you can't just sell the property. I had a situation that way that we didn't catch right away, and we went into contract, and we had to back out of the deal because we were not able to close it because we didn't have the proper documentation from the court. This happens a lot. Person buys a house and they're single at the time, and then they get married, and they never add their spouse to title, and then they go to sell it. It's a lot of it is the honor system, and you need to be honest. If they are married, we need to address it, because again, that particular spouse, California is a community property state, so that spouse has an interest. And if we don't acknowledge that, if we have knowledge and we don't do anything about it, then we're just as guilty as they are. Liens for estate tax, inheritance, income, we don't necessarily see that very often. And it would say definitely on our title report if there was an issue most of the time. Fraud's pretty self-explanatory. If you get a seller that says, I didn't have that lien on the property, I never got that mortgage. I can pull a copy of it, you can look at it. If that's your signature, then, obviously, apparently you did. If it's not your signature, then we would have to take the appropriate steps. Expanded access coverage, restrictions, covenant violations. We don't see those very often either. Building permits we do, and subdivision violations we do see. a lot of times people want to build a shed in their backyard, and maybe they built it, maybe they're handy and they built it themselves. If it's too close to a power line, the city could come out and put a violation on the property. And we do need to know that. And I've had it where the seller actually had to tear it down. And one of the reasons the buyer liked the property was because of the storage in the backyard, but the city wouldn't allow it. So it did delay our escrow quite a bit because, again, they had to tear it down and get the city to release the violation. Zoning laws, encroachment protection, water, mineral. Again, zoning is a good city thing. Encroachment is different easements that may or may not be on the property if somebody's fence is over the line. Supplemental lien taxes. We did talk about that with the property taxes. Our prelim is only as good as a certain date, so we have to be diligent about making sure just before we go to record a transaction, we're going to do another date count. So we're going to look at basically the taxes again, and hopefully if anything comes up between when our prelim came out and recording, if there's something that arises, title will let us know, and then I'll have to be the bearer of bad news and let you guys know as well. So in short, that's a preliminary chapter to work with. Kind of stop it there. Are you guys okay? We have more questions?
Yes, more questions. So I pasted in your contact information. Let's see. We go through the basics. Post, I did that. I'll talk about the coming soon thing later, maybe. How do you get the release for solar?
So different solar companies have different processes. At the end of the day, the most common practice that we do is when I need to get the release, I will email the solar company. I email them a copy of the recorded lien that's on our prelim. I'll get the physical copy and I'll email that and I'll say we need to get a release of lien. Each solar company is a little bit different. Some require an upfront fee, and you can either pay it through PayPal, through their online website, or we've even had to FedEx a check over to them where there's a credit card authorization, but that's basically how it's done.
You need to be aware that the residential purchase agreement, paragraph 8B2, has a somewhat unique contingency because it's under leased and liened items, and which, by the way, is a euphemism for solar panels. But it says in the residential purchase agreement that the buyer's willingness and ability to assume the lease or the lien is a contingency of this agreement for both buyer and seller. Now, that's the only time in the purchase agreement where it says that the contingency is for both sides. Either it's a buyer contingency or a seller contingency. And the issue here is, let's say it's a lease, and your buyer does, Google searching the name of the solar company, but they're going to find out is that a lot of people don't like that solar company, right? Most people don't like their solar company, and they may have bad reviews, and so then the buyer says, well, I don't want to take over that lease. Well, most of them have 10, 20, I saw one recently that had almost a $30,000 penalty if you try to. Basically, you have to pay off the remaining term of the lease in a cash sum. So the question is, who's going to pay that? Is that something the seller's going to pay to get rid of the solar lease? Is it something the buyer's going to pay to get rid of the solar lease? Or the buyer has to assume the solar lease? Be careful about removing all of your contingencies if there's a solar panel and you don't have a copy of that lease and the buyer hasn't had a chance to read it and you haven't read it and they haven't thought about the solar company. And speaking of this, to shed more light on this, Galilee has a listing which has leased solar panels It's in the prelim. That's the financing statement. Yeah. Why would a lender care? I go ahead. I think that may have been addressed already, but
Yeah, like I said, if it's leased and there's a payment plan and the buyer's gonna assume that payment plan, that payment has to be added to their debt to income ratio.
so we have a question about, can we check if the PG&E has put an easement on the property, and where will it be shown on the plot map? Will it be shown on the plot map? PG&E easements.
Yes, usually it's under the utility easement. And what we can always do is we can order a color-coded easement map for you, and that will actually show you on the actual plat map where the easements are located.
Would an IRS lien be listed on a title report?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are times that tax liens are not, state tax liens don't always show up, but IRS tax liens, yes, they follow you everywhere.
Oh, and there can be a water softeners as well, I guess, is a reference to my leased and liened items are usually talking about solar panels. But yes, there's other equipment that you could have. Water softener, that is true. There's other equipment that you could have, but the major one I see is solar panels. Right?
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of hassling over water softeners. In a family of a husband, wife, and daughter, if the loan is under the name of the wife and daughter, what would be the options for title on the deed of the house? Does the husband have to do a quitclaim? I'll correct that. And how would I educate my buyers for the title options? I would say don't do that, but go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and mom and daughter can always be on the loan, and the husband can be a non-borrowing person. So if they don't need his income to qualify for the loan, he can always stay on title the way that they are.
No. And you shouldn't be there. All the title companies, Chicago Title has a document on ways to hold title, which you could share with a buyer, but the buyer really ought to talk to a CPA or a lawyer about how to hold title. The reason a CPA would be probably as good as a lawyer is that most of the differences are tax-related differences, right, as opposed to. Will child support payments be shown on title reports?
Absolutely. And they must be paid current. As long as the person is making current payments and they're caught up, we can get a satisfaction of matured installment that's good enough to pass through.
And you need to pay attention to that. Melissa and I remember Sandra, right? That wonderful transaction. It closed. It closed. I only give Melissa easy ones, right? They're all just, they just sail right through. So he had, the seller had like a judgment for child support. It was like 1965 or something like that. It was like really, really old. And normally there's a 10-year statute of limitation on a judgment. Does that apply to child support judgments? No. So it's still alive. It's still alive. And the let's just say the ex-wife's attitude towards my client hasn't improved much.
Now that they have an adult child.
Right, it hasn't improved very much since 1965, and so it was a mess, right? And so if you see something like that, it's good to start on that right away, because child support judgments don't go away after a period of time. If the seller is in forbearance due to COVID impacts, is that going to show up on the prelim?
No. So again, if you have a seller that you met with for a listing and they've mentioned that they're in forbearance, it's good to get their mortgage information and say, Melissa, this couple or this person's in forbearance, let's get a payout demand. Because again, depending on how long they've been in forbearance, they could be, their mortgage may be 320 and they haven't made payments for 6 months or so. That's all getting added to the loan. They're going to catch up to you.
And hi, David has a question. If a person has a divorce, buys a home by themselves, then afterwards has their last name changed back to their maiden name, do they need to update the title, or can they leave it in their married last name? And what is the cost to update title?
So they can absolutely leave it that way. I always recommend to clients, if you are going to change your name, wait till you refinance. Because again, we're a title company, we issue title insurance. We can't provide deeds to just add or change names. There's a service that of course costs money that they can prepare a deed for you to have that correction done. But if you're planning to refinance, if you just bought your home, a lot of people refinance within 6 months or a year. That's when you want to do it. You want to make sure that you submit your loan in the name of your choice, and then title will automatically prepare the deed to make that correction for you.
Okay, there's one time I found out my rental property was sold without my notice. I contacted my title officer and she corrected this. Is this a common mistake? It's scary.
I think what's common, unfortunately, is that if there's a typo in the legal description and the grant deeds get recorded against other properties. I had a sale not too long ago that when the sellers purchased the property, or the legal description was erroneous, so it was the wrong legal description. So I actually had to go back to my sellers and their previous sellers to have a deed redone and corrected. So it doesn't happen a lot because there's a lot of eyeballs that have to go through our documentation before they record them. But they do, and 99.9% of all of them, they are correctable, they are fixable. Just takes a little patience sometimes.
Yeah. Wild documents running around. Right. My partner and I bought a house. It's only him on the property at the time because I have bad credit score. How can I get back to the property? How can I get back to the... So, go ahead. You add somebody to title?
Yeah, you can do it. You can do a grant deed to add somebody to title. If it's a partner, a spousal partner, there usually is not transfer tax if you are not legally married. There may be transfer tax to add that person to add yourself to title. And again, it depends on the assessed value of the property and what county it's in city.
The flood of questions has subsided. Waiting to see if another wave is about to hit the beach. Not seeing it. So, if mom gives a piece of land to daughter, is it better to sell to daughter or gift it to the daughter? That's a tax question. We are not married, but we file a partnership paperwork. That's,
So unmarried, as long as you're unmarried to each other, there is transfer tax.
Right. And the thing about partnerships are again, this gets back to tax questions, right? Because partnerships generally are not a legal entity subject to taxation. Partners are. So it's possible to hold title, I guess, in the name of a partnership. But, that's not, I don't know. All right, so I think we're getting a slow... This will not be the last time that you guys get to hear from Lynn and Melissa from Chicago Title. There are other things. In fact, one of the ones that might be good to do is the different ways of taking title. Maybe you guys know somebody qualified, i.e. attorney, that would be willing to speak on that could answer their questions. And there'll be some other topics. If you guys have topics like that and you want me to cover them, then why don't you send me an email or something saying, hey, how about this? And we aim to please.
Yeah. I'm happy to do it, just a basic question and answer if there's different things that you have questions about, you know.
I have a favorite topic for escrow officers. There's some years ago I had one that was going to do a session, and she showed up kind of late because nobody had told her, and she was sort of frustrated. She said, I can't talk for an hour. I don't have anything to talk about for an hour. So I said, why don't you just go through all the things that real estate agents do to screw up escrows? She went over. It just flooded out, you know. And that's always a good topic, you know. Things, you know. It just no problem. An hour wasn't anywhere close enough to scratch the surface of that, and that's always a good thing, right? The things that you should do to make everybody's life easier with the, you know, title and escrow, right? All right. Well,
I would like to add one more thing. I think we didn't touch on that. Elderly abuse. I think that I come across a few. Lately yesterday I actually had a phone call from a realtor asking, oh, I have this 94-year-old owner, and the son would like to sell the house for her.
yeah.
Okay, give an example, Melissa. What we need.
So if I were to encounter a situation, I've had different types of elderly sellers. I always like to make sure to talk to my listing agent, and I want to talk to the seller. I want to talk to them over the phone. I want to make sure that they're aware of what they're doing. And 99% of the time, you know, it's all on the up and up, because children do act on behalf of their children or their parents. That's not uncommon, but that's my preference, and that's what our procedures dictate, is that we make contact with them directly to make sure. I did have a situation where a woman wanted to get a hard money loan, and she was getting this hard money loan. It was only good for a year. Basically, if she didn't repay it, she was going to lose her home. And, you know, there's various reasons why people get hard money loans, but the son reached out to me, and mom had fallen victim to a scam about having a relative in the Philippines, and that she needed to get $75,000 over there so that she could get back her $2 million. And she was hell-bent on getting this loan because she was going to get $2 million. So what does it matter? She'll pay it out, you know, when she gets her $2 million. I had to talk to her and ask her some really hard questions. And at the end of the day, I always have the right to deny a transaction. I can say that I refuse to do a transaction. And after talking to her, she was very angry with me because I have no right to tell her what to do, and that I was demanded I proceed with the transaction, and I ended up having to decline. And thankfully, I work for one of the biggest title companies who has a lot of sister companies under their umbrella, because we kind of flagged that property at that point so that she couldn't go to one of our sister companies and continue to help her children out. But there are things, and you have to make sure that you watch out for, especially if you have children approaching you about their parents.
What about in that situation and they're going to get a POA?
Same thing with the POA. If I was trying to think of exactly what transpired in one of my transactions, but I can't think of it.
You have to have a doctor's certified.
Only
right mind, which is.
It depends on the capacity. If they're not able to execute a power of attorney for whatever reason, then we would need a doctor's note. And we'd actually need two from a physician stating that she doesn't have the capacity, or they don't have the capacity to complete a power of attorney.
All right. So we've hit the appointed hour. we could go on for a lot longer. So we're throwing in the towel for this one. I want to thank Melissa for all the great information. Everybody was very, very grateful. We had a decent sized group. Got up to over 60 people at one point. And I've included both Lynn and your contact information in the chat so that they can, reach out to you. If you've got a listing coming up, give Lynn a call. Lynn and Melissa, great combination, great partnership, and, just do it. All right.
Last but not least, please take a look at the preliminary title report when we send out to you. Go through it. If you have questions, reach out to one of us, and we can help you if you have any questions on the preliminary title report. But please try to read, because I work with a lot of realtors, and quite a few of them are not looking at the title report, preliminary title report. So be educated, know your transactions, and that will help you have the knowledge when you need to communicate to your sellers. But we thank you, we thank all of you for attending the class, and we're looking forward to your partnership with all of you. And thank you, Michael, for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.